We're going to do a cheat sheet. We also have pens in case you want to write anything down. Okay. Bill, do you want one of these? No, he's busy. I'll give you one of these. So there are three handouts today. One is a sort of introductory syllabus thing, and one is going to be a map, which is yours to keep or to leave here with your name on it, so you can pick it up each week and use it and write on it and so forth. We also have pens, and the third will be available at the end, which is a list of biblical citations for some of what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover a lot of ground. I mean, a lot of ground today, without question. So, how many people here have been to the Holy Land? A number of you have. Right, good, okay, great, thank you. On the little syllabus sheet, I've outlined my courses, my travels there. I've been so privileged. And it all began by seeing a book on Masada that Yigal Yadin wrote back in the 1970s. And I bought the book and gave it to my parents as a gift so I could read it. It was awful. But, and the first time I visited Masada was on my birthday, and I was completely alone. The tour that I was on was not going to go there, so I got permission just to go on my own into the desert that day, feeling a little bit what Jesus might have felt like in our story from this morning. I have two hopes for this whole thing. One is for all of us to learn something of the geography of the Holy Land and how that has affected Scripture and how it affects our faith and how the characters of the Bible bumped up against that. And secondly, I hope that every one of us will be challenged a little bit by some of what we're going to talk about and see and say, and some of the areas because of the land, because of what archaeology has discovered, and the biblical witness. I think some very cherished traditions and so forth, I'm going to try to directly challenge as we go through the weeks that we have together. 5 presentations, as you can see on the sheet. Today we're going to go to the south of the Near East, to the deserts primarily. Next week we're going to begin in Bethlehem and go out to the coast and up into the hill country of Samaria. And then the third week would be the north into Galilee and the other regions up there. The fourth week we'll spend entirely in Jerusalem. And the fifth week, we're going to take a look at something of the situation of the Holy Land today. I also want to say that the pictures that I have are homegrown pictures. The oldest of these is 45 years old. Most of these slides are 40 years old, but they've held up pretty well. And this is a home projector. So I hope that it's going to work out okay. And finally, we're going to be skipping back and forth across centuries as we go to since we're going to go from area to area. In each area, there's lots of layers of centuries. So we're going to be skipping back and forth over centuries a lot as we talk. So a couple of things before we begin. Well, let's begin. Heck. The Eastern Mediterranean is called the Levant, and it's a huge area. A lot of us think of the Holy Land as the nation, the current nation of Israel, which on the, oh, can I get this to work? Yeah, see right there, that's the nation of Israel right there. That's a small slice of what we're going to be taking a look at. Israel itself as a country is about the size of New Jersey. So it's not a very, very big area. But when we talk about Holy Land and history and scripture, it encompasses everything from absolutely Egypt, all through the deserts, all through here, up as far as Tyre and Sidon, up in this area. So a big area we're going to be thinking about. Again, this is modern Turkey, this is Greece, and Italy is farther. What's not working? Yes, it is. See it? It's right there in the ocean. Little red dot. Little red dot. Well, that's a tiny little thing, Kate, and that's all I've got. So, sorry. So it's there. Okay? Sorry about that. The deserts. There are 4 deserts that figure into Scripture and into our faith history. One is the desert of Sinai, which is the lower section down in here. Again, very hard to see. Sinai Peninsula, through which on the Exodus, the people came through there, we think, and came up. The second is the Jordanian desert, which is here. Yeah, this is not working very well at all, is it? And the third is the Judean desert, which is just east of Jerusalem. And the fourth is the Negev desert, which is between the Sinai and the Judean desert. And we're going to go to all 4 deserts today. The Holy Land is incredible. It includes the lowest open place on the face of the earth. There's no place open that's lower than the area of the Dead Sea. It includes mountains and a high enough mountain in the north so that there is skiing almost year-round at Mount Hermon. So it includes arid, semi-arid, and very fertile plains, as well as the deserts, which are enormously fertile when there's rain. They absolutely break into bloom. So we're going to begin in the deserts today. Are you all okay? Can you hear with me so far? No, I'm not going to use the red dot. It just is too weak for this. So looking in more closely at Palestine, as it was called, in the era of Jesus, with the kingdom of Herod clearly outlined, we're going to hear a lot about Herod. In the north, it's absolutely beautiful and lush. I'm going to go back to that slide. We're going to come up the right side. See the long Dead Sea down toward the bottom? We're going to come up the right side. We're going to first visit the right side of that landmass that's now in Jordan. We're going to come across the Jordan River, and then we're going to go into the Judean wilderness from there. So, back again. The far north is not desert. It is absolutely beautiful, a place of flowing springs and rivers and great fertility. In the south, however, it's quite different. We're going to start in the city of Amman, Jordan. I'm going to pull this back and see if we can get a little more. There we go, okay. This is modern day Amman, and it's built around an ancient city that existed in Jesus' day that was called Philadelphia. And it was named Philadelphia for an Egyptian king of that name. Every Roman city has a theater. And this is the theater in Amman. It seats 6,000. It's from the Roman times. And I want to clear up something about theaters. This is a theater. An amphitheater is a theater that's enclosed all the way around. Amphi means both. So both theaters is a full enclosure. A theater like this is a theater with an open enclosure behind the stage side. So we're going to see a bunch of theaters. The words will be used interchangeably by many people, but not by us. The little pedestal in the center of the Roman theater is the spot from which you can speak, almost as I'm speaking now, and you can be heard at any seat entirely in the theater. The acoustics are phenomenal. And it's still used for public things. Well, we're going to leave Amman, and by private car, we're going to go south into the Jordanian desert. On my first trip there, I traveled with a companion who was a member of St. Mary's Manchester who got bitten by the Middle Eastern bug and lived at St. George's College in Jerusalem and learned Arabic, and she lived there for 5 years. and Judith Lidberg, right? Some of you may have known Judith. You'll see her in here. We're going to head into the desert. This desert is not a sand desert, it's a rock desert. First, we're going to stop at the city of Medeba in the desert. And what's amazing about Medeba is that in the 6th century, a mosaic map was laid on the floor of the church that outlined the whole Holy Land as the people knew it in that time. And there's some remnants of it left. And you can see in the middle of the photograph of the Dead Sea with some boats on it. Indeed, there were boats and so forth. This is a mosaic in the floor of the city of Jerusalem as it looked at the time or just after the Roman occupation. And we'll take a much closer look at Jerusalem on our 4th week. And here it's interesting, the desert is shown. The Jordan River is coming down into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is filled with minerals. There's no outlet, and so it's known as the Dead Sea or the Asphalt Sea. And look at the fish down behind the boat, swimming happily down the river, and this fish coming back from the Dead Sea, ugly, and really can't wait to get out of there. So it's a beautiful, beautiful sense of what happens at that point. And this is the mosaic of the city of Jericho, which we're going to visit a little later this morning, the city of palms. It's all in Greek. Well, back on the road. This is the main highway south through the center of Jordan from Amman down to the Gulf of Aqaba. And it is desert, desert, desert. Deep wadis, high hills, rock and sand and dust. And the reason to look at this is probably one of the routes, the most probable route people think that the Israelites came up on the Exodus. They came up on the east side of the Dead Sea through this desert. So we're traveling south by car, and we're going to come first to the city of Petra. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to stop at Karak first. This is a Crusader castle. The Crusaders, when they established the so-called Kingdom of Jerusalem, built or fortified castles that were out in the desert, and this is a Crusader castle. They were terrible craftspeople. They built very shoddily. And were not known for any fine architecture whatsoever. But there was a knight from Europe who was in charge of this castle as a protection. We come down from Karak and we come to Petra. Petra, for centuries, was a lost city. Just let me ask, how many people have heard of Petra? Oh gosh, a lot of you, good. Okay, Petra was a lost and hidden city to the Europeans for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it was a Swiss soldier who toughened himself up and learned Arabic and began coming through the Arab world and convinced, as a Muslim, and he had a great affinity for Islam, and he convinced local people to take him to this rumored hidden city. Nobody from Europe had been allowed in here, ever, since the Roman Byzantine times. So the way to get into Petra is through a rock cleft that is called a siq, S-I-Q, and it was made by earthquake moving the rocks apart. The whole Holy Land is an earthquake zone, absolutely an earthquake zone. So the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, Lake Hula, all the way up into Syria and all the way down to Mozambique is a clashing or pulling apart of continental plates. And we saw what happened in Syria and Turkey. It's part of that movement of those tectonic plates. And so the Holy Land itself is an active earthquake area, and there have been many cases of destruction of cities because of the earthquakes. Well, this cleft was pulled apart in an earthquake, and it's the only eastern entrance into Petra. And to get in there, you have to ride in on a horse. It's too far to walk, and go through the cleft into the city of Petra. And at the end of the Sikh, the first vision is of a building completely carved out of rock. It's called El Khazna, or the treasury. Petra is important to us for a couple of reasons. It was a huge trading center in ancient times. Trade routes coming up from the south and in from the east and the west, centered on trade. The Nabateans were the people who were in power, hugely in power, at the time of Jesus' life and ministry. And alliances were made back and forth. Herod the Great, we're going to hear a lot about Herod, I'm afraid. His mother came from this city in Petra. She was a Nabatean. And his father came from another area called Idumea, which is just north of this area. And he had converted to Judaism under force, the Hasmoneans. And so one of the strikes against Herod when he was king of Judea is that he was not a Jew. He was an Idumean and a Nabatean, a Jew by conversion. And so a lot of people wouldn't accept him. There are lots of other reasons not to accept him, but that was one. Also, a daughter of one of the kings of Nabatea was married to one of Herod's son, Herod Antipas, who had the Galilee and part of the Jordanian desert as his tetrarchy, and she is the wife that Herod ditched so he could marry the wife of Philip, for which John the Baptist, you may remember, cursed him out, said, "You've broken the law," and so forth, and so forth. Well, John the Baptist hated Antipas, and so did the king of Nabatea. So this, even though it's so far removed, and so remote, it has a lot to do with our history. The city is huge. It's absolutely enormous. All sorts of buildings carved into rock, as well as tombs. And the Romans came and rebuilt it completely as a Roman city when they took it over. The rock in Petra is spectacular sandstone. Petra comes from the same word as Peter, because it's the rock city, as Peter is the rock of Christ, or the rockhead who couldn't get it through his mind what was going really on. Not quite sure. So there's Judith, and that's inside one of the hollowed out buildings. Beautiful, beautiful area. It has a high place. So let's talk about high places for a moment. There were two gods worshipped in Petra, and each of these obelisks faces a different direction for two different gods. The high places are universal throughout the Levant area. And I think there was a belief that the higher you got, the closer to heaven you got. And the space between heaven and earth always was thinner in the high places. So there are high places in all religions, including ours. You think of Moses going up Mount Sinai, high place. Elijah up on the mountain, high place. Jesus in the Mount of Transfiguration, high place. Mount Zion, a high place. So high places are very important geographically for us and our faith. And this is for the Nabateans, a high altar place of sacrifice and worship with the hills in the background. And here we think of a place where animals were sacrificed and blood was drained. And from the high places, looking westward, you can see how impregnable these hills are for anybody trying to come in and conquer this city. Well, we'll leave Petra after that little glimpse. We're going to go further south, and we're going to go into Wadi Rum, which is in South Jordan, up near the north of the Gulf of Aqaba. We're going to stop at a border station. On the right is a Jordanian border policeman, and on the left is Nemir, whose name he told us means tiger. He was our driver, and we hopped into a Land Rover, drove a short distance. That had license plates. We jumped into an old Toyota pickup truck with Nemir, the driver, and and Judith in the cab, and I rode in the bed in the back over the desert. And we went out into Wadi Rum. This is the most unbelievable desert area, and surprising in so many ways. This is the place where Lawrence of Arabia, remember the story of Lawrence and maybe the movie? Some of us saw it together, and came up as a kind of renegade sort of British officer and dressed in Arab dress and rallied Arab tribes, and they came through this desert south to Aqaba to encircle and surprise the Ottoman forces during World War I. So this is the desert through which he rode. There were some surprising things in the desert. Camels, not tethered, not leashed. They know how to get around, and they know where to come home to get food. So they kind of wandered around. We were taken to an area that's protected and shown rock scratchings, probably of Neolithic, pre-Bronze Age peoples who lived in the desert. There were places in the rocks where it's always shade, and there are cups of rock where water can be found. So if you know where the water can be found, you can find water to drink from the winter rains that come down. And we came upon a Bedouin camp. This was a family's camp in the desert, and the parents were out. We don't know where they were, tending flocks, running contraband from Saudi Arabia. We're not quite sure, but this is their home, and of goat skins, and the tent is divided inside. So the part with the dark at the front, that's for men. And the part from the second hump to the back, into the back, that's for women and children and goats. So that when we came to the camp, the 7 children were there. And the desert people are known for hospitality.
I was going to say, what's a Bedouin?
Bedouin is an Arab who lives as a nomad. Now, most Bedouin nowadays are settled down. They're settled down in either small block houses or kind of ramshackle camps and so forth. This family, though, would move about. A nomad is someone who moves about, and they can roll up these tents, load up their camels, and move to a different pasture land. So they are Arabs. Well, it was fascinating because Judith spoke Arabic, and so she was welcomed. They had a great time in the back of the tent. And Nemir and our guide, and Nemir and our driver and I sat in the front of the tent. And all of a sudden, one of the kids came out with this battered up pan of milky, lumpy liquid. And he said to me, "This is yogurt." He said, "They're giving it to you as an offering. I mean, hospitality, feed people," and so forth and so forth. And so I took a sip, and he looked at me and said, "No, no, 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 no." He said, "Drink all of it." So I did. And it went down really fine, and was kind of cool. Hospitality is one of the things. The other thing is that in the book of Genesis, do you remember when the strangers come and Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre invites them into his tent? He was a nomad. He was a nomad. And they tell him that he and Sarah are going to have a son. And the scripture is really clear, and the citations I have for later. Sarah was behind him. She was in the back part of the tent, listening through the goatskin hanging down, listening, and laughed. And of course, they challenged her about her laughter, and she said, "I didn't laugh." She said, "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "Well, whatever." So, but you see something like this. Think of Abraham and his family traveling like this as nomads all the way up from northern, what's now Israel, actually Abraham coming from what's now northern Iran, all the way down through modern Israel to the desert, and finally settling by the Oaks of Mamre. I worried about the family, and our guide said, "Don't worry about them. They do run contraband back and forth and avoid taxes and so forth." He said, "And see all these rugs rolled up that we're leaning against," he said, "they're filled with money." He said, "They're doing just fine." They choose this life. They choose this life. The health of these kids was phenomenal. Teeth is too dry for germs to survive. All the kinds of things we catch in damp climates, they don't have a touch of that anywhere. Extraordinarily healthy. So the clothing, we probably won't see any in these photographs, but the color of the rocks is so variegated and so forth that it's easy not to spot a person in the rocks. So that Bedouin women wear black clothing, completely black from head to foot. And it's so they can be seen. You see how the black stands out against the background. And so when you see a figure in black moving, you know it's a woman, and you don't shoot her. You know, quite literally, you don't shoot her. Secondly, clothing for the Bedouins, you saw the Jordanian soldier, is head to foot, head covered, neck covered, arms covered, and several layers, 2 or 3 layers of clothing. You know, when we go there as Westerners, we go in shorts and t-shirts. They think we are absolutely stupid and foolish. Because what their long clothing does is insulate them from the desert heat. So it's actually cooler inside the desert than it would be if they were out without that clothing on. Secondly, it keeps moisture in. When Kate and I spent some time in the desert, we couldn't believe it. When we took off our packs or our camera straps, there was a band of sweat, perspiration on our shoulders, but we had no idea we were perspiring. So, so their clothing is actually protective and adaptive for the desert. We're going to come back up north now, back to Amman, and we're going to take a look at the Jordan River, because we're going to cross the Jordan River from the east to the west. So this is looking across the Jordan River from, I believe, the Israeli side. I'm not sure. The Jordan River today is a border. It is very heavily guarded, and very heavily guarded. The Allenby Bridge goes across the Jordan River, and it sounds absolutely great, but it's a bridge that was 1 lane, and it's a couple of wooden planks built on a couple of pylons, and I would say the bridge is probably no longer than from where I'm standing to the wall. The Jordan River is not a mighty huge river, deep and cold. It's in fact, by the time it gets here, it's quite depleted. But there is marshland in the desert and growth all around the Jordan River as it comes from the Sea of Galilee south. I think that man over there is fishing, but I'm not sure what's going on. This is probably the site, we think, where John the Baptist baptized. And on the Jordanian side, archaeology has begun digging, and they have found evidence of significant habitation at the edge of the Jordan River. So the thought is that this is from the time of Jesus, and that these were shade lean-tos, whatever, put up so that crowds could be together and out of the sun. And if reading about John the Baptist in the Gospel of John particularly, it's clear that he was not there alone. There was a large community gathered around him, of people who had come from Jerusalem, Judea, wherever, and probably from the Jordan side too, and as well as his own community of followers. So this was quite an active and busy place where John was baptizing in the River Jordan for people to gain the repentance of their sins. Not well visited now because it is such a sensitive area. Even though the bridge is only probably about 30 feet across, both times I've been there, it took me 2.5 hours to get across it because of border guards, of inspections, of questions, and so forth and so forth. And the Israelis said to me, we're going to the other side, we're going to meet a driver, and he said, good luck. He said, you'll be coming back, there won't be any, they just don't get along. But they do drive a couple of buses back and forth across that little tiny wooden bridge. So a map of the hill country. I'm sorry that this pointer isn't working very well, and the Dead Sea. Let me try to show you where we've been. We were way off this map south of here in Petra and Fourm. We've come back up toward the area of Philadelphia, Amman, which is not on this map. We've come down now to the Jordan River, which is here, and crossed right about here. And we're coming now into the west bank of the Dead Sea, leaving the east bank of the Dead Sea. Now we're going to begin in territory that's today part of Israel. This mountain range that runs north-south, you can see the blue is where rainfall is plentiful. Brown is where it hardly rains at all. So you can see the brown areas of the desert that we're going through today, but in the hill country is the blue. And this is much like the mountains, the Sierra of California, where the moisture comes in from the Mediterranean, dumps on the hill country of Ephraim, the plain of Sharon, the plain of Philistia down there, but then stops. And at the height of the mountain range, north and south, if you go half mile the other direction, it's complete desert. And that's how important that mountain range is. And we're going to spend some time on the mountain range, particularly next week. But what we're going to do today is go from Jerusalem, which you can see above the hill country of Judah. We're going to go down into the Arabah, the wilderness of Jordan, of Judah, and then come north into Jericho, and then we're going to go south along the Dead Sea. Okay? Quick look at Jerusalem, nice green, semi-arid. Toward the west, on the slope toward the Mediterranean, lovely agricultural land. Behind me taking this photograph to the east is the village of Bethany, and beyond that is complete desert. Whoops. A photograph from the Jerusalem-Jericho road. It was a terrible road, still is. Jerusalem is almost 2,500 feet above sea level. Jericho is 850 feet below sea level. So in 15 miles, there's a descent of 3,330 feet or more. And it is absolute, complete desert. Now, if you've got really good eyes, you can see a ridge along the far bank. And you can see little bits of green coming down from there. That's actually an aqueduct that was built to take water from springs near Jerusalem down through the desert to Jericho for Herod again, for his winter palace. And the green you see on the right side of the slide is a leak. And really good eyes, you can see a little stream of water coming down through that leak in the aqueduct. But aside from that, and the winter rains, it's as dry as can be. Along the Jerusalem-Jericho road, it was a major trade route, and it was a tough road. Bandits and outlaws hid there all the time, and so when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, this is the road that he talked about. And everything that he talks about in that parable absolutely bears out geologically, geographically, and historically. Robbers would waylay people. donkeys would fall over, loads would shift, the wine jugs and so forth would break. And I've got over on the table there, if you want to see later, some of the breakage from that road that I picked up just off the surface while I was there. Might have been from the time of Jesus, who knows, of wine carriers, wine jars, and so forth. Anyway, it's a dreadful kind of road, and I can understand why people going down along it, seeing someone lying there, didn't want to break their journey. I mean, it just was terrible. At any rate, the story is, as you know, that the Samaritan came through and bound up the wounds and took the man to an inn. Now, if you're lucky, someone will point out this building and say, ah, that was the Inn of the Good Samaritan. Well, it wasn't there, folks, in Jesus' day at all. But it is a caravanserai, and caravans can stop there as they come through. Not many do today. And you can see the camel on the left waiting for tourists to ask for a ride. Christians went into the Judean wilderness regularly, and in this wadi is St. George's Kasiba Monastery. Maybe you can you see it? Let me try to point it out. It's these buildings right here in the wadi, right? These buildings is a Greek Orthodox monastery. For monks who keep themselves separate from the world, which was an early and enduring tradition, and the only way to get into the monastery is on foot. Many mile walk in the wadi, right? And we get down to the Jericho plain, and there's a wash coming through there, and the ruins in the center are from Herod's winter palace. This Herod we're talking about, we're going to hear a lot more about him. And he had palaces and fortifications all over the place. And this was a winter palace because it's so warm down there in the wintertime. He'd get away from the ocean where normally he would spend his time, and certainly away from Jerusalem. And in the background is a band of green, and that is a desert oasis in the background. It is the oasis that is one of the oldest cities in the world, which is Jericho. And in the background beyond here is what's called the Mount of Temptation, the story we heard about today. People popularly think that Jesus went up on this mountain somewhere, and there is a monastery up there you can go to also for the temptation. In the excavations on the tell is a defense tower way below ground, as you can see. This defense tower is more than 8,000 years old. And Jericho is heralded by some as the oldest city that's ever been uncovered on the face of the earth. And this was a tower built to defend the settlement of the time. You can see how over the centuries the land has built up, very common in the Holy Land. Don't go there in the summertime. We did. It's unbearably hot. Unbearably hot. This is a photograph off the top of the tell toward modern Jericho, the city of palm trees. Outside Jericho, those buildings in the background, that's the remnants of a Palestinian refugee camp. When the partition took place in 1948, many Palestinians left, Arabs, left what became modern Israel and stayed in camps like these. This camp right now is primarily deserted, although the buildings are still there. Okay, we're going to leave Jericho. Oh, by the way, Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho. The walls came tumbling down. There's some evidence that there weren't any walls in Jericho's day. But, you know, there is the sense that if the Hebrew tribes came into the country and conquered their way through, Jericho would have been the first stop on the way. There's a lot of evidence that the Exodus was not nearly the huge march of people that the Bible describes. It was 600,000 men and women and children and so forth in addition, but rather there might have been a time when some tribes, nomadic tribes, came in over a period of time and settled and identified as Hapiru from Egypt coming up through. We're not quite sure that it was a massive onslaught, kind of like the Russians coming into Ukraine or something. It was kind of over a bunch of time. South from Jordan, near the Dead Sea, is ruins of a monastic community of Jews that were called Essenes. We think these were Essenes. And they lived in the desert to get away from, the story is, the corruption and sinfulness of urban life. Because in Jerusalem, remember, there were all sorts of people living there. The Romans were occupying. There were all sorts of things going on. This was the place to live, a monastic community of men, I believe. Water, they got water once a year. I'll explain that in a few minutes, but these are some of the buildings. They looked for a time of the coming of the Messiah when the world would be turned upside down. In fact, scrolls from the Essene community parallel the teachings of John the Baptist. And I think that John the Baptist lived among the Essenes for a while. And would, rather than staying in the community, John took their teachings and the expectations and brought them out for more people who would come for baptism at the Jordan River than would come to the Essene community to live. It's, thought about that. Anyway, so the Essenes were there. And the other thing is that right near this ruined monastery complex that was active in Jesus' time, there are hills in the background. You see the Dead Sea. And those caves are where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. 1940, whenever it was, the story is that a couple of Bedouin shepherds were throwing rocks in the caves. They heard a crash. And then some people climbed up into the caves to find out what crashed. And they found storage jars filled with papyrus manuscripts. So that major excavations happened in these caves over the next 10 to 15 years. And people are still looking at caves in this area to see if there are more manuscripts. And so the major shrine in Jerusalem, the Shrine of the Book, is particularly featuring the Dead Sea Scrolls. Amazing scrolls, both about Essene life and about the earliest scrolls we have of books of the Bible. For 2,000 years in the dry desert, perfectly preserved. Dead Sea. There is no exit from the Dead Sea for water. And so for millennia, the Jordan River has come down, emptied here, and then with the evaporation from the Dead Sea, the water evaporates and the minerals in the water are left behind. So it's unlike any other body of water that I've ever been in or near in my life. You can walk into it about this deep, and you can't walk any further because you'd tip over, because the water makes you so buoyant. Also, it's filled with bromides, and they soak through your skin, and they are a relaxant. And so our guide would say, come on, time to go. Or he said, so? It's just the most amazing experience. Public beaches there. And there's a person sitting in the Dead Sea. I mean, you can't help but sit. It was, I can't hear you. Of the water? It's a kind of the dark blue that you see there, very, very dark blue. Yeah. And when you get off, you have to kind of get the salt off you, and take showers. You could never get dressed after getting just out of the salt. So this was the woman who I met there who was willing to have her picture taken. So Now we go a little further south and we come to the last stop really on this trip. And it's the Fortress Masada. I'm going to just ask, how many people have heard of Masada? Okay, number have. How many people have been there? Okay, okay, a couple of us, good. Herod reigned for about 40 years altogether. And he was enormously effective in his reign, except that he turned brutal toward the end of his life. And at any rate, during his life, it's kind of as if Herod left his mark on the Holy Land with all the building, and Jesus left his mark on the Holy Land with the kingdom of God. Kind of, I mean, they were, and so forth. Herod was died in 4 BC. He had turned through, people have said syphilis, arthrosclerosis, kind of whatever. He had turned ugly, vile, and paranoid in his later years. Herod altogether had 10 wives. I don't know if he had a bunch of them at the same time or not. I just don't know. But his favorite wife, the one whom he loved deeply, was Mariamne, who was the daughter of high priest of the Hasmonean, the high priestly family. And actually marrying her gave him some credibility with the Jewish population. And he loved her to pieces. Well, his sister came along and convinced him that Mariamne was working to overthrow him. So he had her strangled. He had her killed. He killed 3 of his sons. He killed all sorts of people right and left in his raging madness toward the end of his life. We'll talk some more about Herod in the future. But he died in 4 BC. Now, his is the story in the scripture of the Magi coming to see Jesus, and Herod saying, "Tell me where he is. I want to come worship him." Do you remember that from the Gospel of Matthew? And being warned in a dream not to do that. They returned home by a different route. I think they went back through the Jordanian wilderness, maybe to Nabatea, and I don't know where they went. But when Herod found out that he'd been tricked, he ordered all the male children in Bethlehem, 2 years old and younger, to be slaughtered. This is a wild story. It is absolutely consistent with who Herod was. Absolutely consistent. But there are a couple of fascinating things about the story. One is that if Herod died in 4 BC, that meant that Jesus was born before the year 1. So Jesus was probably born, we think, 6 BC. So Jesus was born maybe 6 years before Christ. You know, because the people who figured it back the years just miscalculated. The other thing is that Herod caused all the children, 2 years old, royal children, 2 years old and younger, to be killed. So that says to me that Jesus may have been 2 years old at this point. So in all these beautiful creches we have with the Magi there and so forth, I don't think they came for another 1.5 to 2 years. And reading Matthew, the Magi came not to the stable, but the Magi came to the house where he was. So, you know, we've conflated a lot of the birth stories. We're going to talk some more about that when we get to Bethlehem next week. But if we take Herod's dating and so forth, and the 2 years since the star had appeared and all that kind of thing, Jesus probably was born 6 BC, we think. Bethlehem, yeah, I'll buy that. But the chronology, I think, is quite different. Anyway, Herod built huge fortresses, and he also built a city we're going to see next week, which we have never heard of from the Gospels anyway. That's Masada, a natural outcropping of rock. The desert sunrise at 4:30 in the morning is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. That's from the top of Masada. Our group went there and climbed Masada at night up the assault ramp that the Romans built to get to the zealots, the Jewish zealots at the top. And we're looking east over Jordan. Looking down from the top, on the way up to Masada, the snake path is going down, and there's a covered canopy for a resting place. It's a climb of about 1,500 to 1,800 feet from the Judean desert down below to get up by the snake path, which was the only way it could be provisioned in the Maccabean Herod times. And looking off from the top of Masada on the north, looking down, there are two levels. One is round and one is rectangular. Those both were sort of like elegant summer house palaces where Herod and his family could go and look over the desert and look out into the distance, and you could see anybody coming for 10 miles in any direction. The palace was adorned with beautiful painted walls. There were hot baths and cool baths and steam baths. There was an outdoor swimming pool. You could house easily 600 to 1,000 people up on the top of this fortress. Storehouses would hold food and supplies for holding out against a siege from anybody. And also there were gardens that were built up at the top. And the question is, where did all this water come from? The water came from spring rains, the winter rains that fall in the desert. It does rain in the desert, and it rains torrentially in the desert. And so there were channels built to channel water into about 4 or 5 cisterns that looked like this. And there would be enough water in there, so they had outdoor swimming pools and gardens and fountains and so forth up on the top. And as I say, it could last for pretty much forever. Well, what happened was that a group of rebels, Jewish rebels against Roman rule, and this land was always in warfare, rebelled in the year 66 against the Romans. This is about, we think, 33 years after Jesus died and rose again. And the Romans brought in legions and legions of soldiers, and the Jews finally barricaded themselves. They took Masada and barricaded themselves on the top and rebuilt Masada very roughly for their own purposes. The mosaic floor is Herod's. The little niche up there is Zealot construction on top of the mosaics. The Romans built siege camps all around Masada and laid siege for it for, 2 years? And these were huge camps they built. They built a wall completely around the fortress so nobody could get in or get out. The Zealots built mikvahs where you could go down and do ritual washing. Again, heck with Herod's floors, for keeping the purity that was required. And they could look out through the walls, they could see the Dead Sea and the Romans down below them. Apparently, you can be at the top of Masada and call out, and the desert is so still, that you could be heard down below in the Roman camp. This is some of the area around Masada. The floor of this wadi is flat. The rains in the winter come unexpectedly and torrentially, and they may fall much higher up in the mountains than down below. So there are different ways you can die in this desert. One is from dehydration, lack of water, no question about it. It happens. So I dehydrated on an extended trip into the desert and had to spend a day and a half, eating tiny pieces of bread with salt and taking sips of water. And our tour leader said, if you really get sick, I can put an intravenous into you. But we're not going to do that unless we have to. So dehydration is an enormous difficulty in terms of living in the desert. So dehydration, wild animals, there aren't any there, but there were lions and tigers and all kinds of things in the desert in these days. Getting in an argument over water, In the book of Genesis, as Abraham and his family are moving through the deserts, there's often confrontations at water wells about whose water is it, can you have the water, and that kind of thing. Getting lost. It all looks the same when you're out there. It all looks the same. Anybody remember Jim Pike, who was a bishop of the Episcopal Church? Well, he was the one who kind of ushered in a break-open era of theology in the 1950s. He was in the Judean desert on a Jeep trip with a companion. They got lost. They couldn't find their way out. They died. They died in the desert. The other way to die is by, yes? Huh? Did she? Was she with him?
She was with him.
Okay.
It turned out that they were just a very short distance from a road.
Yeah.
And he died because he fell.
Okay. Well, getting lost. Getting lost is a problem. The other way you can die in the wintertime is by drowning. And this sounds absolutely improbable, but the rain comes crashing down through these wadis, and it may be up, and you may not hear the rain, and you may not hear the water coming. But if you're in the wadi and it comes down with a force that is just enormous, you're swept away before you know what happened. And that's where the water for Masada and some of the water for Qumran came from those winter rains that got stored up. There is a beautiful oasis down in this area called En-Gedi, and again, it's like Jericho. It's filled with date palms, just gorgeous. But there's a spring of water there, and so forth. This is the vehicle. I thought I might just show this. The vehicle that a group of us traveled on for 6 days in the Judean and Negev deserts. It contained everything we needed: water, food, medical supplies, air compressors, sleeping bags. And we were allowed to bring a small satchel of clothing, and that was it. We probably repaired, we didn't, the driver did, at least 3 flat tires every day because of driving across the desert with the rocks and puncturing tires and so forth. I'm sure that they carried firearms too because of the danger sometimes in the desert, so forth. But we were out sleeping on the desert floor, had to pick a place and clear the rocks away to make sure there are no scorpions, and roll out your mat and lie on your mat and sleep under the stars in the desert. And we're going to leave Masada now and go into the desert further, across the waste, and there's so much more out there. There are more Bedouin camps. There's the city of Dimona, which was started on the sands and is now the center of Israel's nuclear and technical industry. There's the city of Beersheba with Ben Gurion University, and David Ben Gurion's kibbutz is just outside Beersheba. There's the city of Shivta, which is in an area like this where the Byzantines who lived there figured out how to capture that water and grow grapes, because the desert will bloom if you have water. So where we've been, we've come up through the land of Moab, we've come up and crossed over the Jordan River, and we hopped up to Jerusalem, came down back to Jericho, and came down along the Dead Sea. And that's where we're going to stop. So thanks very much. It kept long. Next week, if you're brave enough to come back, we're going to start in Bethlehem. We're going to go, you can keep your maps, and we're going to collect them. If you want to put your name on them or not, whatever. You don't have to carry them home. You can if you want to. We're going to Bethlehem, we're going to go up the seacoast, and we're going into the hill country of Samaria. Thanks. Huh? Where was this?